The sun was slowly setting over the endless plains of the African savannah, casting long golden shadows across the tall grass. The air was still, filled with the hum of insects and the distant cry of wild birds returning to their nests. Ranger Thomas Hale had been patrolling the edge of the reserve for hours, his boots covered in red dust and his shirt drenched with sweat. He had been working in this wildlife sanctuary for nearly 10 years, but what he was about to witness would leave him speechless and forever change how he saw the wild. As Thomas reached the edge of a small watering hole, he stopped to take a sip from his canteen. The horizon was quiet, too quiet. Normally, around this time, the plains would echo with the calls of elephants, the chatter of baboons, and the deep roars of lions marking their territory, but today it was eerily silent. That kind of silence in the wild usually meant only one thing: something was wrong. Suddenly, a faint sound broke the stillness. It was soft at first, almost like a whimper. Thomas froze and listened carefully. The sound came again, this time closer, a cry high, pitched and trembling, like a baby calling for help. His instincts took over as he crouched low, scanning the grassland. Then, through the golden grass, he saw movement. A small figure stumbled toward him. Out from the tall grass came a tiny lion cub, its fur matted with dirt and streaked with tears. Its little legs wobbled as it ran, and its cries echoed with fear and desperation. Thomas blinked in disbelief. A lion cub alone was an incredibly rare sight. Cubs never strayed far from their mothers, and if one did, something terrible had likely happened. The cub stopped a few feet away, trembling, its round amber eyes wide with fear. For a moment Thomas stood frozen, unsure what to do. 1,000 questions raced through his mind. Why was it alone? Where was its mother? And why did it seem to be crying for help, not out of instinct, but almost as if it understood something was wrong and needed him? Slowly Thomas knelt down, lowering himself to the cub's level. "Hey there, little one," he whispered gently, his voice soft and calm. The cub hesitated, then took a few shaky steps closer. It was limping, and now Thomas noticed a small cut on its side, probably from thorns or a fall. The cub whimpered again, and before Thomas could react, it pressed itself against his leg, burying its tiny face in his boot as if begging him to follow. Thomas's heart sank. It wasn't just scared, it was desperate. The cub turned, let out a short cry, then looked back at him, waiting. It wanted him to come. Whatever had happened, the cub was leading him toward it. Without wasting a second, Thomas grabbed his radio. "Base, this is Ranger Hale," he said urgently. "I've found a lone lion cub, injured and distressed. I'm following it into the northern sector. Send backup just in case." Static crackled, followed by a voice. "Copy that, Ranger Hale. Be careful. Northern sector's been showing signs of poachers lately." The word poachers made Thomas's stomach tighten. He glanced at the cub again. "All right, little one, lead the way." The cub limped forward, occasionally glancing back to make sure Thomas was following. They moved through the thick grass, past acacia trees, and down toward a small dry ravine. The deeper they went, the more uneasy Thomas felt. He could see signs of disturbance, broken branches, scattered prints in the dirt. But it wasn't just animal tracks. There were boot prints too, fresh ones. The cub whimpered again, this time louder, and sprinted ahead. Thomas followed closely, his hand resting on his tranquilizer rifle. When he reached the bottom of the ravine, what he saw made his heart drop. Lying on the ground ahead was a massive lioness. Her golden fur was stained with blood, and her breathing was shallow. A thick steel snare was wrapped tightly around her hind leg, cutting deep into her flesh. The cub rushed to her side, crying softly as it nuzzled her face. The lioness tried to lift her head, but was too weak. She gave a low, painful growl that quickly turned into a whimper. Thomas's eyes burned with anger. Poachers had set a trap here, and this mother lion had fallen victim to it. The cub must have run all the way across the plain to find help. The thought struck him hard. This tiny creature, barely a few weeks old, had somehow found the courage to seek out a human, an act of pure instinct and desperation. Thomas immediately knelt beside the lioness. "It's okay, girl," he whispered. I'm going to get you out of this." He reached for his kit and carefully examined the snare. It was a wire trap designed for antelope, but deadly to anything that stepped in it. The lioness growled faintly as he approached, but the cub pressed against her, calming her. Thomas worked quickly, using a pair of heavy cutters to slice through the wire. It took several tense minutes, but finally, with a snap, the snare gave way. The lioness flinched but didn't move. Her leg was bleeding badly. Thomas used his medical kit to disinfect the wound and bandage it as best as he could. All the while, the cub stayed by her side, watching him with trust in its tearful eyes. When he was done, Thomas stepped back and called for the rescue team again. "I found a snared lioness. She's alive but weak. We need a transport unit immediately." "Copy that," the base replied. "Team en route. Eat of 15 minutes. 15 minutes felt like an eternity. Thomas stayed beside the lions, making sure no predators or poachers came near. He could tell from the lioness's breathing that she had been trapped for nearly a day. She must have fought hard to free herself before collapsing. The cub snuggled against her neck, and Thomas could see now that it wasn't just fear. It was grief, confusion, and love. The little one refused to leave her side even for a second. For a moment, Thomas felt something stir deep inside him, a sense of awe and sadness at the raw bond between them. Finally, the rescue team arrived in a jeep with a tranquilizer specialist and a veterinarian. They sedated the lioness gently to reduce her pain and loaded her carefully into a stretcher. The cub cried when they lifted her, trying to climb onto the stretcher too. Thomas picked it up gently. "Don't worry," he murmured. "We'll take her with us." The cub stopped crying, as if understanding his words. Back at the reserve clinic, the veterinarian worked tirelessly for hours. Thomas stayed outside, sitting with the cub on his lap. It rested its head on his arm, exhausted. When the vet finally emerged, she gave him a tired smile. "She'll live," she said. "It was close, but you got her just in time." Thomas let out a deep breath of relief. The cub let out a small, tired mewl, as if it understood the good news. Over the next several days, Thomas visited the clinic every morning. The lioness began to recover, and the cub was never far from her side. The staff nicknamed the mother Nala and the cub Keto, meaning hope. It was fitting, because if it weren't for that tiny cub's courage, her mother wouldn't have survived. Weeks passed, and soon the day came when Nala and Keto were ready to return to the wild. Thomas accompanied the team to release them back into their territory. The jeep stopped at the edge of the savannah, where the tall grass swayed in the wind. The lioness stepped out first, strong and proud once more. She turned to look back at Thomas for a brief moment, her golden eyes meeting his in silent understanding. Then she gave a deep, powerful roar that echoed across the plains. Keto followed close behind her, glancing back at Thomas one last time before disappearing into the tall grass. Thomas stood there for a long time, watching the horizon where they vanished. He couldn't help but smile. In all his years as a ranger, he had seen many things, acts of cruelty, survival, and wild beauty, but never something like this. A tiny cub had run across miles of dangerous wilderness, not to escape, but to bring help for its mother. That night, as the stars filled the African sky, Thomas sat by the campfire, replaying the events in his mind. The wild was full of mystery and danger, but also of love and courage that defied all logic. The image of the crying cub running toward him, eyes full of hope, would stay with him forever. He finally understood something he had never realized before. Sometimes the wild doesn't just need protection, it asks for it. And when it does, it speaks not in words, but in the cries of a helpless cub brave enough to believe a human might listen. And that day he did. The plains slowly faded into silence again, the stars shimmering above as somewhere out there, a mother lion and her cub roamed free once more together, because of a bond that transcended fear, species, and the limits of nature itself. Thomas Hale would always remember the day the crying lion cub ran to him, and how what he discovered left him utterly speechless.